Welcome to week 3 of the fight for your heart. That's essentially what we've said your life could be described as, a raging battle for the health of your heart and for the hearts around you. We've been discussing the fact that you need story if your heart's going to be in any decent shape. And one of our favorite storytellers is a guy called C.S. Lewis, and we've not been able to get very far before I've had to quote him. But C.S. Lewis wrote the Narnia series, so he invented that character Aslan. And he invented Aslan as a character to help us understand Jesus better. He got a letter once from a young boy called Lawrence, and Lawrence's mom had been on his case that it seemed like he had started to love Aslan more than he loved Jesus. And Lawrence was feeling quite guilty about this, and his mom had been going, "You're supposed to love God more than you love this character." So he writes to C.S. Lewis, this little 7-year-old, saying, "What do I do? I just have so much more affection for Aslan than Jesus." And C.S. Lewis, with incredible wisdom and brilliance, replied, "The things that you love Aslan for saying and doing are things that Jesus actually said and did. And so as you love Aslan, you're probably just loving Jesus better than you've ever loved him before." Such an amazing answer, because C.S. Lewis understood that Jesus told parables for the exact same reason we should continue to tell parables. C.S. Lewis took his role as a parable teller or a storyteller really seriously, because he realized that our hearts need to connect not with fact, but with story. Story communicates the deeper truths, much more than facts ever could. Which is why, at one point when he was being interviewed, C.S. Lewis said the following: "Do you think I'm trying to weave a spell? Perhaps I am. But remember your fairy tales. Spells are used for breaking enchantments as well as for inducing them. And you and I have need of the strongest spell that can be found to wake us from the evil enchantment of worldliness which has been laid upon us for nearly 100 years. He's not just doing silly wordplay here. He understands that we are in a battle where we've been woven stories and had spells cast over us, just like Neo had in the Matrix, that have been systematically damaging our hearts. Stories about how life is supposed to be. Stories about the things you should desire. Stories that give you an incorrect idea of your place in the world and in God's affections. Those stories have become almost accepted. That's become the lens that we look at the world through. And so C.S. Lewis sees his role as a storyteller as one who weaves mythical, wonderful spells that awaken us to the real truth, the truth of what's really going on in the world. And it's always worth stopping and thinking, these stories aren't there just for interest's sake, but to help me understand that I live a story, you live a story, your life is a narrative, it amounts to something. And I think half the problem that we have is that we don't really know how to tell our story correctly. It's easy for me to think just this last week, I must be honest, this has been one of the hardest things I've ever had to film. Normally I love to sit down here and the guys set up all the lights and make fun of me while I sound check, and then we just prattle on, and if the logic makes sense and I'm able to have a little bit of clarity of thought, this thing normally goes easily for me. But I've spent this whole week since filming the last 2 sessions freaking out. Am I the right guy for this? Why did I even volunteer to do this material in the first place? I'm too heady to start with. I shouldn't be the one talking about heart. And had to beg to see the footage from last week to convince myself that it was actually any good. Is that just our insecurity? Or could there be a sort of more exciting story being told? That there's some opposition to this material coming out, that there's some opposition to my heart believing that I might have something to share on this topic. And as soon as I realize, I'm involved in a battle, I'm involved in a beautiful big story, then I'm inspired to fight against that. Whereas as long as I think it's just me all alone and all of this is arbitrary and there's nothing supernatural or super special going on, we miss what's right in front of our eyes. I had a great big fight with my wife on Saturday. And once again, if I wasn't seeing my life as a story, that would have just passed unnoticed. But Saturday is like our Sabbath day. Saturday is the day where we get to connect. And I know that my heart desperately needs to connect to other hearts, just like yours does. And if you're a married person, then that heart is the heart that really, the health of your heart is tied to almost more than any other. That person can hurt you more than anyone else can. Neglect the health of their heart at your own peril. And so Saturdays are our day to really slow things down and get through some time together and some chores in the normal domestic story that is being told. And we prize those days, and we ended up tearing strips off each other during Saturday morning. And it was one of those confusing, dusty windshield things where you go, how did we even get here? I can't even remember what we were arguing about in the first place. And we've got quite good at fighting well. And it is possible to be good at fighting with your spouse, where you don't end up reverting to generalizing and all that stuff. We're normally pretty good at communicating clearly what we're frustrated about or what we're feeling. But in this instance, I just couldn't put my finger on what had hurt me so much and left me feeling really quite afraid of the next thing she might say. And I ended up being all nasty out of my fear. That's what you do. And she couldn't understand how I was making my problems her problems. And we got to this kind of impasse, loggerheads. And I suddenly had to catch myself slipping out of telling the story correctly and return to telling the story correctly, which is that my good heart and her good heart have an enemy that's trying to attack them. And if he can attack our connection, he's done a really good job. And I had to pause and apologize and eat humble pie and say, I think there's something spiritual going on here. And so in the course of this week of busyness and stress and bad news on various fronts and feeling insecure about my filming of this material before, the enemy throws one last spanner in the works. Let me just attack your Saturday, your day that really fills your tank. I wonder what's gone on in your last week, that if we don't put it in its proper story context, we just chalk up to it's my fault, it's arbitrary, it doesn't matter. And actually our hearts are under attack. And we're not taking Proverbs 4 seriously, to guard our hearts, because it's the wellspring of life. Do not take seriously the idea that your life is a battle for your heart. And as soon as you tell the story right, as soon as you see the consequences and the context for what's going on, it becomes so much more exciting and ennobling to fight back and to say, actually, no, this isn't just me being insecure. Actually, no, this isn't just us being irritated with one another. There's a spiritual force going on. And there's a whole lot more at stake, which makes it worth fighting back bravely. C.S. Lewis had a great friend, someone who he had some heart connection with. They would chat late into the night about these big mysteries of life and the dramatic, really epic story of humanity. And his friend's name was J.R.R. Tolkien, who wrote the amazing Lord of the Rings trilogy. And there's a point in the first book where Frodo and Sam have gone further out of the Shire than they've ever gone. The windshield is well and truly dusty. The sun is setting into their eyes. It's hard and scary and confusing. And Sam says to Frodo, Mr. Frodo, I wonder what kind of tale we've fallen into. That is a great question to ask. Sam is assuming that he's in some kind of story, that some big epic thing is going on, and that at the end of his days he'll be able to look back and figure out what it all meant. And yet so often in the moment we don't ask that question. What tale am I in? How do I describe the story that I'm in? Sam knew to ask that question. We should as well. This is a story I never really paid much attention to, but The Wizard of Oz has got this amazing moment in it that is one of those stories that we really need to hear. If we're trying to figure out what tale have we fallen into, you might find that some of your life resonates here. Dorothy's wandering around in this whole new world, finding all kinds of strange people. She meets a scarecrow who's an idiot and has no brain and is desperate to go to Oz to ask for a brain. But en route they meet a really interesting character called the Tin Man. He used to be a woodcutter. He used to be a lumberjack in a forest. And he was in love with a girl, the Munchkin Maiden, and he was going to get married to her. But there's an enemy in this story, the Wicked Witch, who hates this woodsman and wants to stop the marriage. So he's out working day and night, chopping down trees, trying to build a house so that he can get engaged and married to the Munchkin Maiden. And she curses his axe. It slips, cuts his arm off. Shock horror, can't work, what's he going to do? He finds a tinner. There's a guy with amazing mechanical skill who's able to produce a tin arm for the woodsman. And so he carries on thinking he's beaten the Wicked Witch. And the axe slips again, cuts the next arm off. And so the story goes, his leg and more bits of him are being replaced with this really amazing mechanical marvel, the tin body. And he can cut harder and for longer than the next guy can. Until one day the axe slips and it cuts his whole body in two. And he's on death's door and the tinner says, well, I can turn you into a fully tin man, a fully mechanical man if you want. And that's what ends up happening. The tragedy in all of this, though, is that his heart gets removed. And suddenly he doesn't care if he marries the Munchkin Maiden at all. His body shone so brightly in the sun that he felt very proud of it, he says. And it didn't matter now if my axe slipped, for it couldn't cut me. There was only one danger, that my joints would rust. But I kept an oil can in the cottage and took care to oil myself whenever I needed it. One day, unfortunately, he got caught in the rain, forgot to oil himself, and got stuck on the side of the road. And this is where Dorothy meets him, freaking out, trying to get to Oz. To ask for what? To ask for more oil, to ask for a better Teflon-coated body that doesn't get stuck? No. The thing he wants more than anything else is a heart. And the Scarecrow says, why on earth would you want a heart? Without a head, any fool can have a heart and do dumb things. And the Tin Man says, it was terrible. But as I've stood here, all rusted, stuck, I've had time to think. And I realized that the greatest loss I've known was the loss of my heart. While I was in love, I was the happiest man on earth. But no one can love who has not a heart. And so I'm resolved to ask Oz to give me one. If he does, I will go back to the Munchkin Maiden and marry her. And the Scarecrow goes, oh, that's crazy. I'm still going to ask for a brain. The Tin Man says in this final amazing line, I'll take the heart. For brains don't make one happy, and happiness is the best thing in the world. I want to tell you one other story. And it's a story about a couple of guys who are dejected. Their hero has seemed to let them down. The thing that they risked everything for, the thing that they sacrificed everything for, the big hope, the big dream, the big play of their lives has turned out not to have worked. It's like two entrepreneurs who realize that the thing they thought they'd invented has already been invented by someone else. It's the person who risked everything for love to discover that actually it wasn't returned. These two guys are walking dejectedly along a road to a place called Emmaus. They were disciples of Jesus, and they've just seen him crucified after they were convinced that he was going to be the next big thing. He was going to be God himself, but he just got put to death, so obviously they had it wrong. And as they're walking along the road, Jesus sneaks up on them. You've just got to love Jesus in the way he rolls. So he sneaks up on these guys who are busy mourning and discussing the terrible events of Jerusalem over the last week. And he asks them quite sneakily, what are you guys chatting about? And they look at him aghast and say, well, where have you been? I mean, how could you not know? All of Jerusalem is talking about what's happened. There was a man, and we had hoped that he was Jesus, or the Messiah. We had hoped that he was something really encouraging and exciting for our story, but our stories have taken a turn for the worse. And actually, we're not really sure what we're going to do next. And Jesus wanders down the road with them, asking them a few questions and then explaining the scriptures to them, which proved actually that if they'd only paid attention, the story always involved this moment where Jesus was going to have to die and appear to have lost everything before the big victory would come. And they're listening to him kind of working his way through all the prophets of old and showing how the Messiah had to suffer. And so eventually he pretends, I still don't know what Jesus was on about here, but he pretends he's going on further, and these guys say, no, come and eat with us. And as they invite him into their house, they suddenly realize that their eyes suddenly are opened. The eyes of their hearts really catch on to what's going on. They look beyond the here and now and their disappointment, and they see that they're part of something big. They see the tale that they've fallen into. And they realize it's Jesus in front of them all along. And at that moment, he disappears. And they say something amazing. Their eyes were opened. I'm in Luke 24. They recognized him and he disappeared from their sight. They asked each other, were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us? There's something fascinating about that phrase because it reminds me of another place in the Bible where that phrase is used. Jacob falls into a dream and has a vision of angels ascending and descending on a stairway to heaven, and suddenly realizes that he's on holy ground. Suddenly realizes the scope and breadth of the story that he's living in, just like the one you're living in, which is a supernatural story where there are two realms connected, even if it's not super visible how they're connected. That there is a supernatural story unfolding in his life, and he wakes up and goes, wow, surely the Lord is in this place. My heart burnt within me. We're so ignorant of when our hearts are burning. We're so unaware of the clue that these guys had actually been having all along while they were walking down the road. Their hearts were burning within them because they were in the presence of Jesus himself. They were in the presence of something sacred. They were connected to the bigger story, and their hearts were burning even while their brains couldn't catch up. So the question I have for you is, when does your heart burn? When does something inside you bubble over? When does something inside you shout and scream in silent protest? You're in the presence of something big and important. You're in the presence of something real and true, even if it's not quite factual, even if it's not quite visible, even if your intellect can't quite keep up with it. The story that you're living in, the tale that you've fallen into, is going to require you to get quite good at spotting when your heart's burning and when it's having cold water poured on it. If I'm my heart's worst enemy, if I'm my own worst enemy when it comes to keeping that thing fed and healthy, chances are I continually expose myself to stories that are bad for my heart. In fact, if I am honest, when I watch too much Suits, I find myself being really combative in the way that I speak to people I care about. Or if you watch too much of anything, if you listen to too many front page news stories, if you pay too much attention to the local security WhatsApp group, if you expose yourself to the wrong narratives, this stuff isn't just Hollywood. It actually impacts the way you see the world. if my heart runs on narrative, then I might be doing a whole bunch of stuff that's making my heart run cold or making it flare up for all the wrong reasons. But when does your heart burn within you? When do you feel yourself coming alive? What stories are the ones that, as a child, you resonated with most? One of the best questions you can ask is your childhood heroes, the kind of fables that you most wanted to live up to. What is it about those heroes that your heart connected with? Because you were made to be glorious. You were made to be important in the story. You were made to be part of a heroic narrative. And it would stand to reason that if God has put eternity in the hearts of man, there would have been some clues from the very beginning in the things that your heart leapt at. Do you want to revisit that stuff? Do you want to figure out why it is that you loved Batman and you loved whoever you loved? I only can think of Batman because that's who I loved. What about that hero uniquely fired me up? Could that give me some clues as to how I'm supposed to walk out my calling? And so that's what you're going to spend the rest of this conversation doing, is stop being such an enemy of your heart, start to become a protector of your heart, one who figures out how to fan it into flame. And so you're going to have some conversations now about, when does my heart burn within me? What are the moments that I can remember where something has leapt inside me saying, this is what I was born for. This is what living is really supposed to be about. This is what's deeply satisfying. This is an important moment. And you'll be shocked to find how much of our lives are directed at things other than those moments. And we are chasing some other version of success that doesn't look like a heart fully alive, fully burning, fully passionate. And we're prepared to live hard-hearted, half-hearted, downhearted, or not hearted at all. And so the heroes that you resonated with, the stories you most loved as a child, the moments in conversation or in creation where your heart feels most alive, you're going to spend some time doing some homework and becoming an expert so that you wouldn't walk down the road to Emmaus with Jesus passing you by, supernatural, sacred things happening at any given second. And we're just so unaware of the state of our hearts that we don't notice that everything inside you is crying out, saying, this is an important thing, don't miss this moment. Good luck with that conversation. This might be one of the most important you ever have.